With us today on Explore Israel is a most distinguished guest, former Ambassador of Israel to the United States, former Deputy Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister of Israel, a world-renowned historian and author, Ambassador Michael Oren.
Maintaining that bipartisan support has become increasingly difficult.
Would Germany agree to an international investigation of its troops
as long as Iran is trying to establish itself militarily there, because Israel has no choice, has to operate.
Our eternal and undivided capital, Jerusalem, would be recognized.
And today, guess what, Lucy? They burnt it down again. It's to create that humanitarian crisis. You are a great tool for Hamas.
Michael Oren, welcome to Explore Israel.
Shalom.
Ambassador Oren, you were an American citizen. You grew up in the United States of America. You even revoked your American citizenship in order to be the ambassador of Israel in the United States. All of the above endows you with a unique vision and perspective in relation to current events in the United States of America and the relations with Israel. Please share with us your views on the current situation.
Well, the current situation is very complex and very dynamic. First of all, the United States is in the throes of a presidential election, and that election will profoundly impact American foreign policy toward Israel and the Middle East and the world. And Israel itself may be in the midst of an election. And we're not quite sure whether Israel will be going to the fourth round of election in just over 2 years, which would be very, very unfortunate indeed. So the situation is highly fluid. With that, we've had the announcement of the normalization of relations between Israel and the United Emirates, the Arab Emirates, which is an extraordinary breakthrough, a stunning breakthrough. It is a game changer in terms of the peace process. It's a game changer in terms of our need to defend ourselves in the region against Iranian aggression. And it holds out tremendous hopes for the future, both on the economic sphere, the strategic sphere, the tourism and person-to-person sphere as well.
If I just follow up on the UAE and Israel relationship, you know, there were some figures that tried to belittle the peace accords, the Abraham Accords. Could you share with us what are your views about the significance of this agreement? After all, we do have agreements with Jordan and Egypt. So what is significant about this agreement?
It's an agreement of immense historic significance. First of all, it upended all of the assumptions about the peace process that have existed for 30 years, 50 years, some even as old as the State of Israel itself, one of them being that Israel has to pay for peace by giving up territory. We give up a tremendous amount of territory to Egypt. The Sinai Desert is 3 times the size of the State of Israel. We even give up territory to the Jordanians. The Jordanians wouldn't make peace unless we give up some territories as well in the Jordan Valley. It had nothing to do with settlements. Israel did not have to uproot settlements. It punished rather than rewarded the Palestinians for leaving the table. And it promises to wed the most innovative country in the world with one of the wealthiest countries in the world, which can prove transformative for the entire region. And I am confident that other Arab countries will follow the example of UAE, Bahrain, Oman, perhaps Sudan, perhaps even Lebanon. This is the beginning of the historic process, not the end of it, and it is overwhelmingly positive.
Thank you. Let's touch for a minute the bipartisan relationship between Israel and the United States. There are some who voice concern that the bipartisan relationship has been affected negatively. What are your thoughts on this issue? Are you concerned?
I think it has been eroded in recent years. Not necessarily because of Israel, because of internal processes in the United States, the deepening political polarization, the radicalization in wings of both the Republican and the Democratic Party. And we do our best to try to navigate between those poles. At the end of the day, it appears as of tonight that former Vice President Biden and former Senator Kamala Harris will head the Democratic ticket. I know both of these individuals very well, and they are very pro-Israel. So in that way, the bipartisan support in the center of these parties is very strong.
What do you think is the secret behind the binding glue in this special relationship between the United States and Israel?
It's the most special relationship between any two countries in the world, and that's because it rests not just on 1 or 2 pillars, but 3 different pillars. The first is a spiritual pillar that goes back even before the founding of the United States. It goes back to the Puritan experience at the beginning of the 17th century. And the Puritans loved the Hebrew Bible. They gave their kids Hebrew names. They studied Hebrew at universities. And they were deeply committed to the idea of restoring the Jewish people to their homeland as a state. And that idea was carried on through the founding fathers of the United States, through Thomas Jefferson and Woodrow Wilson and Harry Truman. And it very much impacts American foreign policy toward Israel today. In addition, there is a strategic alliance, which really grew up in the aftermath of the Six-Day War. Israel fought that war without American support, but afterwards America woke up and said, you know, there's this great ally in the Middle East that is standing up to the Soviet Union. Later it would stand up to Islamic extremism, and we should be allied with that country. Today, the strategic military alliance between the United States and Israel is probably the deepest and most multifaceted alliance which the United States has had with any foreign country in the post-World War II period. And it's many areas. It's intelligence sharing, it's cyber defense, it's joint maneuvers, weapons developments, extraordinary relationship. And finally, and certainly not lastly, it's the common and shared democratic values. Israel is one of the 5 or 6 countries in the world that has never known a second of non-democratic governance. We have institutions that are very familiar to Americans, and I can't tell you, every time I went up to the Senate and the Congress, there'd always be, the Congress people would always open up their discussion saying, what's most important to me is our shared democratic values. And so you put these 3 together and you say, well, maybe France or Italy have a defense alliance with the United States and their democratic countries, but they don't have the spiritual connection. You put all 3 together and it makes the U.S.-Israel relationship totally and utterly unique.
Ambassador Oren, let's talk a minute, if you don't mind, about yourself and your activity. I think what is less known about you is the fact that you've authored many books and that you've even been ranked 3 times bestseller on the New York Times author list. Now, I understand that you're coming out soon with a new book. Please share with us what is this book about and what are your intentions in this book?
This next book is called The Night Archer and Other Stories. The Night Archer and Other Stories, a collection of over 50 short stories.
How would you term it? Is it like a non-fiction novel?
No, it's very much fiction, and it's different genres of fiction. There are murder stories, there are mystery stories, there are historical fiction, there's political fiction, there are ghost stories. Again, I think you'll be very much entertained by it. The short stories are quite short for the most part, and you could read 1 or 2 a day. But it will keep you, I think, for the most part, on the edge of your seat. I'm really thrilled about this book. It's being published by a new Jewish press. It's called Wicked Son. You'll like that. The editor is Adam Bellow, is the son of Saul Bellow, and we're all very excited about it.
Writing makes me feel alive. Writing for me is freedom. As a writer, I can be anything, be anywhere at any time in history that I want to. I'm Michael Oren. I'm an historian, a diplomat, and I am a writer. Whatever I was doing in life, whether I was in politics or diplomacy or writing history, teaching in a university, every day I begin the same way. Early in the morning, I sit in front of a computer and I write. My book, The Night Archer, is different than just about any other collection of short stories by one author. There are over 50 short stories in this book, and each one is completely different. I was Israel's ambassador to Washington, and there are stories about diplomacy, stories about social climbing in America's capital. I worked in Hollywood. I was Orson Welles' assistant, and so there's stories about Hollywood. I was a soldier. There's stories about war. I'm a father, a son. There's stories about parenthood, there's stories about childhood, and of course, there's stories about love. The Night Archer is a journey to passion, to mystery, to spirituality, and to love. Join me on this journey. I promise you, it will be an adventure.
We wish you success with your new book. And before we conclude, is there any message you would like to share with our viewers? The platform is yours.
Israel, like the rest of the world, is going through many challenges right now with Corona, the economic crisis. And one thing you learn both as a writer and as an historian and as a statesman is to look at the long view of history and keep in mind that with everything we're going through, we still have this state. It is an extraordinary state. We've just made peace with a very crucial Arab country, and is the beginning of a whole new era in our history. And you learn that even in the sometimes very dark shadows, you can see the light. And there's a tremendous amount of light shining on this country right now. As soon as you can get out a plane, God willing, may it be soon, come back and visit us.
Ambassador Oren, thank you for joining us on our program, Explore Israel. We wish you the greatest success with your new book.
Thank you to the Consul General in Los Angeles. Shalom.